Welcome back for another book talk video. It's Science Fiction Sunday, which means I get to talk about some amazing sci-fi books. Today I want to tell you about the C.S. Lewis trilogy known as the Space Trilogy or the Ransom Trilogy. And it's called the Space Trilogy by a lot of people because C.S. Lewis, of course, is best known for the Chronicles of Narnia and being a fantasy author. And so the fact that these books are set in space really does make them different from his other works, though I'm about to argue that really these books should just be considered fantasy, probably, and not necessarily science fiction. Though the first book was published in 1938, and then the two other books in the trilogy in the 1940s. C.S. Lewis wrote these books with that 1930s, 1940s kind of knowledge of our solar system and space, which is very different from perhaps how we look at the planets and what's going on with them today. And so to me, it really does seem more like a fantasy adventure. Like if you were reading Jack Vance's Dying Earth series, where characters traveling across a somewhat alien fantasy realm and learning about the different people and creatures that are out there. And really, those creatures, C.S. Lewis cast them very much as angels and demons and godlike beings. So it is fun. Well, let me put it this way. Books 1 and 2 in the series are, to me, that kind of fun, rambling fantasy adventure kind of story. Book 3 in the series starts out very different, though also fun, but more as if it's a satire of the academic world, of the ivory tower, how committee meetings are done, how the budgets and finances are done in that sort of setting, because of the way that the characters interact and talk about those things. In fact, at the beginning of book 3, I thought that perhaps there'd been some horrible cosmic accident, and either I had the wrong book or that this wasn't really part of the trilogy. But it does end up looping back into the character from the first two books and all kind of making sense when put together. It was just a great contrast the way that book 3 started as opposed to book 1 and 2. And that's because book 1 and 2 are very much the adventures of Elwyn Ransom as he goes out into space. And we get to see a couple different planets. In the first book, it seemed like he wasn't going to go back out into space after that adventure. So the second book was a little surprising when it was like, all right, off on another space adventure, Ransom. There you go. Not to give you any intense spoilers by saying that obviously the main character in a trilogy is going to survive from book to book. That's just going to be given. Some people believed that C.S. Lewis was creating a self-insert sort of character with Ransom by making him a professor and someone who studies language and all of that. But actually, C.S. Lewis insisted that he used J.R.R. Tolkien, who was an Oxford professor, as the model for the character. And that's really fun because that's the guy who did The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And the character does end up on these other planets, and there are situations of naming things and figuring out alien language and how all that system works. It does come across as very dangerous with the space travel and dealing with the creatures on the other worlds. Clearly, we know now that these kind of creatures do not exist on the planets in our solar system, but that's why I say it feels much more like a fantasy story than it does science fiction. But this is one that I think people could very much argue about the divide between how much is the author actually trying to use science and how much is it just a fantastical adventure with fantastical creatures and that sort of thing, because the only science-based aspect would, to me, really be the way that Ransom travels in a spaceship to get out there. But I'm not really sure. I don't know the 1930s technology, how well that they understood those things, so I'm not sure how much the C.S. Lewis was basing that on fact or not. It was really fascinating to hear the description of that sort of spaceship and journey and how it was put together. But I would say, I really feel like that's the only science-y aspect of it. Alright, I think I've said enough. If you enjoy old school science fiction, if you enjoy fantasy stories, if you enjoy satire, then I think there's a chance you would enjoy the Ransom Trilogy, also known as the Space Trilogy, by C.S. Lewis. Every day is a good day for a book talk. Peace.